The notification arrived on a Tuesday. I know that sounds ordinary. That is exactly the point. The most significant document in human history was delivered on a Tuesday morning, through a standard diplomatic relay, in a plain white envelope stamped with the Council's pale gold seal. The clerk who handed it to me did not bow. He did not make eye contact. He placed it on the edge of the desk outside the observation holding room where Earth's diplomatic delegation had been sitting for 6 hours, waiting to be acknowledged, and he walked away without a word. My name is Yara Holt. I am, as of this writing, the first and only human being to have served as a formal envoy to the Galactic Council. That title sounds impressive. I want to be clear about what it actually meant for the first 4 years of my appointment. It meant I sat in a room with no windows and waited. It meant I submitted written requests for floor time and received automated rejections. It meant I attended open gallery sessions where 47 species debated trade routes, territorial limits, and resource rights, and I sat in the observation tier, one level above the chamber floor, behind a glass barrier that was not physically necessary, but was there to remind observers like me exactly where we stood. Earth was classified as a Class 3 observed species. That classification meant we had achieved space travel. It meant we had colonies. It meant we had been noticed. What it did not mean was that we mattered. Class 3 species were catalogued, monitored from a distance, and occasionally mentioned in council reports the way a biologist might note an interesting insect. They were not invited to speak. They were not consulted. They were observed, in the same way you observe something you have no intention of disturbing because it does not seem capable of disturbing you. I had held my posting for 4 years and 7 months when the envelope arrived. I opened it carefully. The paper inside was a formal council document, printed in the 7 primary languages of the founding species. English was not among them. A translation chip had been tucked inside the envelope as an afterthought, which I found remarkable, since the document concerned Earth directly. I pressed the chip to the corner of the page and read the projected translation, floating above the paper in pale blue light. Resolution 7 Theta. Passed by a vote of 31 to 16, effective in 30 standard galactic days. The resolution declared that the Sol system, including all planetary bodies, orbital infrastructure, and inhabited colonies within its boundaries, was to be designated a resource protectorate under council oversight. The justification was a single line of administrative language that I read 4 times because I wanted to be certain I had understood it correctly. Earth had failed to demonstrate sufficient self-governance capability to maintain independent territorial status. For the security and resource stability of the wider galactic community, annexation was therefore necessary. They had looked at us for 60 years and decided we could not take care of ourselves. I set the document down on the desk. I set the translation chip beside it. I sat very still for a moment and looked at the pale gold seal on the envelope, which depicted the 47 member worlds arranged in a ring, each one connected to the others by a thin line. Earth was not in the ring. Earth was not in the image at all. I thought about the 60 years of silence that had brought me to this room. I thought about the conversations I had never been part of, the decisions I had watched from behind glass, the clerk who had not made eye contact. I thought about what was sitting, very quietly, in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. I thought about the signal that would go out the moment I confirmed receipt of this document, and what that signal would set in motion. I picked up the document and folded it neatly along its original crease. I tucked it back into the envelope. I pressed my thumb to the receipt confirmation pad that the clerk had left on the desk. Then I did something I had not done in 4 years and 7 months, of sitting behind a glass barrier and watching the galaxy make decisions without us. I smiled. It was not a large smile. It was the kind of smile a person makes when something they have been expecting for a very long time finally, at last, arrives. The kind of smile that has nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with the particular satisfaction of being proven correct. I had arrived at the council station as a diplomatic observer with 2 pieces of luggage, a case of bottled water from a river in New Zealand, and instructions from the UN Security Council that could be summarized in 3 sentences. Watch everything. Say nothing. Wait for them to make the mistake. 47 species. 60 years. 31 votes. They had finally made the mistake. I stood up from the desk, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the door that separated the holding room from the main corridor of the council station. The door was keyed to council members only. It had never opened for me before. I did not need it to open yet. I had somewhere else to be first. There was a communications terminal at the end of the holding corridor. I had used it exactly once in 4 years, to send a message home on the day I arrived, telling my mother the view of the station from the docking bay was extraordinary, which it was. I sat down at the terminal now and opened a secure channel. I typed a code I had memorized 7 years ago and never used. 14 digits, no spaces. I typed 2 words. Clock starts. I sent the message. I closed the channel. I stood up and walked back to the desk and sat down and picked up my water bottle and drank from it slowly, because my throat was dry. 31 votes. 30 standard galactic days before the annexation fleet would arrive at the edge of our solar system. They had no idea that the message I had just sent would reach a receiver less than 4 seconds after I sent it, because the relay was not routed through any council-monitored channel, but through a private network that Earth had been building, quietly and without announcement, for the better part of a decade. They had no idea what was already waiting for that message. In that moment, sitting in a holding room I had never been invited to leave, I understood something that I had suspected for a long time, but never fully felt until now. Patience is not passive. Patience is not the absence of action. Patience is the most disciplined form of preparation there is. Every species in that chamber had looked at Earth and seen stillness, and read it as weakness, because that is what stillness looks like, when you are used to being the most powerful thing in the room. They had never considered that something still might simply be waiting for the right moment. The right moment, as it turned out, was a Tuesday. I finished my water. I set the bottle down. I looked at the pale gold seal on the envelope one more time. Then I waited, because that was the one thing I had always been very, very good at. I want to tell you exactly what the galaxy did not know about us. Not the broad version, not the diplomatic summary. I want to tell you the specific, precise truth of what we had built in the years when every other species in known space had looked at Earth and seen a quiet, moderately developed planet with no apparent ambition. I want you to understand it the way I understood it, standing on the bridge of the Earth Defense Compact's flagship on the morning Yara's signal came through, because understanding it is the only way to understand what happened next. My name is Renz Okafor. I am the Admiral of the Earth Defense Compact. I had held that position for 11 years, and in 11 years, not a single being outside of Earth's government and military knew that position existed. That was not an accident. The EDS Vigil is 340 meters long. She carries a crew of 420. Her hull is coated in a sensor-dampening material that we spent 18 years developing, which absorbs and redistributes electromagnetic signals in a way that makes her appear, to every scanning technology currently used by Council species, as a collection of loose asteroids. She does not look like a ship. She does not read like a ship. She is completely invisible to anything that is not actively looking for her with technology that does not exist anywhere outside of Earth's military archives. The Vigil was built in a facility hidden in the inner asteroid belt, inside a hollowed-out rock that we had spent 6 years carefully excavating, without any visible surface activity. The construction happened entirely inside the rock. The workers were shuttled in through tunnels, too narrow to track from orbit, on schedules that were designed to look, from the outside, like routine mining operations. We built the Vigil in 4 years. Then we built 1,100 more ships just like her, and several dozen that were considerably larger. I am telling you this not to boast, though I admit there is a certain satisfaction in saying it plainly. I am telling you this because the scale of what we had built is the only way to understand the scale of what the Council had missed, and the scale of what they had missed is the only way to understand the nature of what they had done to themselves by passing Resolution 7 Theta. 60 years earlier, when the first Council vessel entered our solar system and transmitted a standard first contact greeting to any species capable of receiving it, Earth's governments convened an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council. That session lasted 11 days. It produced a single classified document, never made public, never leaked, never discussed outside of the rooms where it was created. The document was called the Harrogate Protocol, after the London street where the building housing that session was located. I have read the Harrogate Protocol many times, It is not long. It is 7 pages of plain language that essentially says the following. We do not know what is out there. We do not know how many of them there are, how long they have been traveling, what they want, or what they are capable of. We have exactly one chance to respond correctly to this moment. If we show strength and they are stronger, we provoke a confrontation we cannot survive. If we show weakness and they are predatory, we invite exactly the kind of outcome we are most afraid of. The only response that gives us time to understand what we are dealing with is to show nothing at all. So Earth said nothing. Oh, we responded to the greeting. We sent a polite, mathematically structured signal, confirming that we had received the transmission and were glad to make contact. We provided basic information about our biology, our planet, our approximate technological level as of that moment. We said we looked forward to peaceful communication. We said all the things a young, developing species might be expected to say. And then, very carefully, very deliberately, we started building. Not just ships, everything. We built ships, yes. 1,147 of them over 60 years, each one constructed inside a sensor-dark facility, each one tested in regions of the outer solar system too far from the ecliptic plane for routine Council observation passes to catch. We developed propulsion systems in secret. We developed weapons in secret, though I want to be precise about this. The Earth Defense Compact's weapons were designed entirely for defensive application, for the specific purpose of stopping an incoming threat without necessarily destroying it, because the Security Council had a strong preference for winning arguments rather than battles, and you cannot have a conversation with a ship you have reduced to debris. But we also built something less obvious and far more important. We built a network. Every diplomatic observer Earth sent to Council space over 60 years was selected not just for their language skills or their patience, though both were required in abundance, but for their ability to watch and remember and catalog. Yara was the 6th human to hold the position I just described, and like the 5 before her, she was not simply sitting in that observation gallery watching the Council debate. She was learning. Every session, every vote, every speech, every backroom alliance and public falling out and quiet trade deal was recorded and transmitted home through channels the Council had no knowledge of. Every species' known military capacity, every resource dispute and territorial sensitivity, every species that had been wronged by a Council vote and quietly swallowed it, every promise made and broken in that chamber over 6 decades of interstellar politics. Yara did not just observe the Council. She gave us a map of it. The morning her signal came through, I was on the bridge of the Vigil running the standard daily readiness check that we ran every morning regardless of operational status. Because readiness is a habit, and habits do not disappear on the days you need them most. The signal came in at OJOT 6:14 station time. 2 words on a secure channel. Clock starts. I had been waiting for those 2 words for 11 years. I read them once. I set the tablet down on the navigator's console. I looked out through the forward observation port at the asteroid field around us. The rocks drifting slowly in the dark, completely ordinary, completely unremarkable, hiding inside them enough military capacity to change the structure of everything that lived beyond our solar system. Then I opened the ship-wide channel and spoke 4 words to my crew. All hands, battle stations. Not because we were going to fight. I want to be clear about that. The plan was never to fight. Fighting was the outcome we had spent 60 years engineering our way around. Because a fight, even one we won decisively, would have told the galaxy that humans were dangerous in the simple, straightforward way. It would have made us something to be afraid of in the way you are afraid of a predator. And a predator, in a galaxy this large, is always eventually hunted. We did not want to be feared the way you fear a predator. We wanted to be respected the way you respect something you cannot fully understand. The orders went out to all 1,147 ships within the same minute. Encrypted, compressed, sent through the relay network that Earth had spent 20 years seeding through the asteroid belt in small, undetectable nodes the size of a human fist. Each ship received its orders, confirmed receipt, and began to move. The movement was extraordinary. Not because it was loud or fast, though our ships were both when they needed to be. It was extraordinary because it was completely silent. 1,147 vessels, spread across the outer regions of the Sol system, began repositioning simultaneously, and not one of them produced a signal detectable by any scanner the Council operated. They moved like shadows. They moved like things that had been designed from the very first rivet to disappear inside the fabric of space itself. 3 hours after Yara's signal, our long-range sensors picked up the Council's annexation fleet crossing the outer system boundary. I counted them from the bridge. 40 ships. I remember the feeling that moved through the bridge crew when the count came back. It was not laughter. It was not contempt. It was something more complicated than both of those. Something that I can only describe as a deep, quiet, aching sadness on behalf of the beings in those 40 ships, because they had come here prepared for a planet they thought they understood, and they had no idea what they were sailing into. 40 ships. I had 1,147. Their vessels were good ones. The Council's military technology was not primitive. Their sensor arrays were sophisticated, their propulsion was reliable, and their weapons were fully capable of doing exactly what they were designed to do. Under normal circumstances, 40 Council warships entering the orbit of an undefended Class 3 planet would have been more than adequate for the task of enforcing an annexation order. These were not normal circumstances, but they did not know that yet. I gave the order to deploy the net. The electromagnetic containment system we had developed over the previous decade was not a weapon in any conventional sense. It generated an interlocking field of low-frequency electromagnetic interference, spread across a volume of space large enough to encompass the annexation fleet's projected position, that disrupted propulsion systems gently, the way a very soft hand stops a rolling ball. The ships would not be damaged. The crews would not be harmed. They would simply stop. They would hang in space, completely functional in every other sense, completely unable to move forward or back, and they would remain that way until we decided otherwise. The net deployed in 11 seconds. Every ship in the annexation fleet stopped within 4 minutes of crossing the containment boundary. I watched the sensor display as 40 blue indicators went from moving to stationary. I watched the signals they sent out, distress calls and status queries and demands for explanation, all of them reaching our receivers perfectly clearly, and I thought about the fact that we were not going to respond to any of them. Not yet. That part was Yara's. My job was done. My crew had held their posts without a word of panic, without a raised voice, without a single moment of hesitation. I looked around the bridge at 420 human beings who had spent years preparing for a moment that the rest of the galaxy did not know was coming, and I felt something that I think can only be called pride, though it was quieter than that word usually implies. I opened the ship-wide channel again. "Fleet," I said. "Running lights only. Hold formation." 1,147 ships lit up the dark. Not weapons, not engines, just lights. Clear, steady, unmistakable. The kind of light that says, "We are here, we have always been here, and we have been waiting patiently for you to notice." The annexation fleet's distress signals changed tone. The demands for explanation became something quieter, something I recognized because I had studied every emotional register every Council species was known to express. It was the sound of 40 crews realizing, all at once, that they had made a very serious error in judgment. I sat back in my chair. I picked up a coffee mug from the holder beside the console. The coffee inside was cold, because I had made it 3 hours ago and forgotten to drink it. I drank it cold. I thought about the 40 ships sitting motionless in the dark, surrounded by 1,100 vessels they had not known existed until 60 seconds ago. I thought about the Council chamber, where Yara had just received a document in a plain white envelope and sent a 2-word signal in response. I thought about 60 years of asteroid belt shipyards and sensor-dark construction facilities, and a diplomatic observer who had sat behind a glass barrier and never stopped watching. I thought about the Harrogate Protocol, 7 pages of plain language written by people who had understood, 60 years ago, that the most dangerous thing you can do when you do not know what you are facing is to show your hand too soon. We had not shown our hand. We had kept it folded, face down, on the table for 6 decades. The Council had just asked to see our cards. I finished the cold coffee. I set the mug down. I looked at the display showing 1,100 points of running light holding position around 40 stationary ships in the dark between the stars. It was, I thought, a fairly good hand. The door to the council chamber had never opened for me before. That is the thing I keep coming back to, even now, when I try to describe what that moment was like. Not the 40 ships sitting motionless on the other side of the solar system, not the 1100 lights holding formation in the dark. The door. The simple, physical fact of a door that had been closed to me for 4 years and 7 months, suddenly being open. It opened because I walked up to it and entered the security override code that Earth's intelligence team had extracted from the Council's own administrative database, quietly and without detection, 18 months earlier. The door read the code, registered it as valid, and slid aside. That was all. I walked through it. The main corridor of the Council station was busy at that hour. It was mid-session, the third period of the day, and the chamber floor was fully occupied. Council members and their aides moved through the corridor with the practiced efficiency of people who had been doing this for a long time, in a building where they had never once needed to worry about who might be walking behind them. No one looked at me twice. I was wearing a standard diplomatic observer's badge, pale gray, the kind that no one in that corridor had ever needed to pay attention to before. I had worn it every day for 4 years. I was, to every being who passed me in that corridor, invisible in the most complete sense of the word, not because I was hiding, because they had simply never learned to see me. I walked the length of the main corridor. I turned left at the junction that led to the chamber antechamber, passed through the second checkpoint with the same override code, and stopped at the inner door. Through its narrow window I could see the chamber floor. The session in progress was a celebration. I had not expected that. I had known the annexation vote had passed. I had known it had passed days ago. What I had not anticipated was that they would be marking it with any kind of ceremony. But there it was. The chamber was decorated with the pale gold banners of the resolutions sponsoring species, and several high-ranking council delegates were standing in small groups near the speaker's platform, which was currently empty, in the loose, self-congratulatory posture of people who feel they have recently done something worth congratulating themselves about. I watched through the window for a long moment. I counted the delegates I could see. I noted which species were clustered together and which were standing apart, and I filed all of it away the same way I had filed everything away for 4 years, automatically and without effort, because watching and remembering was something I had made into a reflex long ago. Then I opened the door and walked in. The inner chamber door was not secured with an override. It was secured with a Class 3 observed species restriction, which meant it would not open for any diplomat from a non-member world. The restriction had been added to that door 40 years earlier, after a non-member delegate from a species called the Ossiv had pushed their way onto the floor during a live session to protest a vote that affected their home system. The Ossiv had been removed, censured, and reclassified to Class 2, which meant even less access than before. The Council had added the restriction to prevent exactly what I was now doing. What they had not done was update the list of credentials the restriction would accept, because they had never imagined that a Class 3 species would have acquired a valid credential code. Because to acquire a valid credential code, you would have had to penetrate the Council's own administrative security without their knowledge. Because to do that, you would have needed resources and capability far beyond what a Class 3 species was assumed to possess. We had possessed them for 11 years. The door opened. I walked through. The chamber floor was larger than it looked from the observation gallery. I had sat above it for 4 years and always had a sense of its size, but standing on it was different. The ceiling was high, the acoustics were shaped to project speech clearly to every corner, and the moment I stepped onto the main floor, the sound of my footsteps changed and became something I could feel in my feet as much as hear. Several nearby delegates turned at the sound. They looked at me the way people look at something that should not be there but clearly is, with an expression that takes a fraction of a second to resolve from confusion into recognition. I watched recognition cross their faces. I watched it followed immediately by a second expression, for which I did not have a word in any of the 7 council primary languages, though in English I would have called it alarm. I walked to the center of the floor. The Earth seat, which had stood empty for 60 years, was a plain chair at a plain desk positioned at the outer edge of the 47-member ring, with a small nameplate that read simply Earth in the Council's standard administrative font. No one had ever sat in it during a live session. I sat down in it now. The chamber had not gone fully quiet yet. There was still ambient noise, murmured conversation from the edges, the soft sounds of a room that had been in mid-social activity when something interrupted it. But the quiet was spreading. It moved outward from where I sat like a ripple in water, reaching one cluster of delegates and then the next, until the chamber was the kind of silent that has weight. I reached forward and tapped the speaker panel on the desk surface once. In council protocol, a single tap on the speaker panel constituted a formal request for floor recognition. In the 4 years I had observed sessions from the gallery, I had watched this protocol used thousands of times. I had never used it myself. The panel lit up beneath my hand with a pale blue confirmation glow, which meant the request had been registered by the chamber's automated systems, which did not know that the person making the request was not supposed to be on the floor. The Velkari High Arbiter was standing near the speaker's platform when I entered, and she had turned toward me at the same moment everyone else had. The Velkari are tall, with a particular stillness about them when they are thinking, and the High Arbiter had been still since the moment she recognized my badge. Now she walked toward the center of the floor with the measured pace of someone who is choosing their response very carefully. She stopped 3 meters from my desk. "Ambassador Holt," she said. She had a low voice, precise and unhurried. "You are not permitted on this floor." "I am aware," I said. "I am here anyway. You will be removed." "That is possible," I said. "I would ask you to wait a moment before making that decision, because what I have to tell you will change the nature of this conversation significantly." The High Arbiter was silent for a breath. She was calculating. I had watched her calculate for 4 years. She was very good at it. "Speak," she said. I did not stand up. I spoke from the Earth seat, because I had earned the right to sit in it, and I was not going to give it up now. "Earth formally rejects Resolution 7 Theta," I said. My voice was steady. The acoustics of the chamber carried it to every corner without me needing to raise it. "Earth withdraws from Class 3 observed status, effective immediately, and requests formal recognition as a Class 1 sovereign power. This request is retroactive to the date of first contact, 60 years ago." The noise that followed was not quite an uproar. It was the sound of 47 delegations simultaneously calculating what they had just heard, and arriving at the same reaction, which was something between disbelief and the first edge of a different and less comfortable feeling. I waited it out. "This is not a recognized procedure," the High Arbiter said. Her voice was still controlled. "A non-member species has no standing to request reclassification from the chamber floor." "I understand that," I said. "I am also asking you to understand something else." I reached into my jacket pocket and removed a data chip. I slid it into the desk's display port. The chamber's main holographic display activated above the floor, projecting an image that filled the upper half of the chamber volume. It showed 40 ships. They were suspended in space, lit from the outside by running lights that were not their own. The running lights surrounded them completely, on all sides, above and below, arranged in a formation so precise and so complete that it looked, from the sensor feed angle I had chosen for the projection, less like a fleet and more like a net, which was exactly what it was. 1,147 human vessels, every running light on, every weapon system offline, every engine at idle, surrounding 40 council ships that were not moving, and were not going to move until we said otherwise. The chamber was completely silent now. "The Council's annexation fleet," I said, "entered the Sol system approximately 4 hours ago. They encountered a containment field at the outer system boundary, and have been held in position since that point. No crew member has been harmed. No vessel has been damaged. They are guests, in the most literal sense of the word, until this conversation concludes." The High Arbiter had not looked away from the holographic display since it appeared. I watched her study it. I watched her count the lights the same way I imagined Wrens had watched her count them, methodically and with a growing awareness of what the numbers meant. "You had all of this," she said. It was not a question. It was barely even a sentence. It was the sound of a calculation arriving at a conclusion that did not match any prior assumption. "We had this and more," I said. "What you are looking at is what we considered proportionate to the situation." "Proportionate," she repeated. 40 ships were sent to annex our solar system," I said. "We surrounded them with 1,147. That ratio is proportionate. We could have brought more. We chose not to, because the goal of this conversation is not to demonstrate superiority. It is to establish equality. Those are different things, and I want to make sure we are both clear on which one we are pursuing. The chamber had the quality of a room in which every being present was holding very still, not because they were afraid, though some of them were, because they were thinking, and the thinking required everything they had. The High Arbiter finally looked away from the display and back at me. "You were watching us," she said, "the entire time. 60 years. "Yes," I said. "And you said nothing." "We were waiting," I said. "For what?" I looked at her across the space of the chamber floor, in the seat that had been empty for 60 years, in the room that had been making decisions about the galaxy without us, for as long as any of us had been alive. "For you to give us a reason," I said. She was quiet for a long time. Around her, the chamber remained still. The holographic display continued to show 1,100 points of steady, patient, unwavering light, holding position in the dark around 40 ships that had arrived expecting an unarmed planet. When the High Arbiter spoke again, her voice was lower than before, and something in it had shifted in a way I could not name but recognized, because I had heard the same shift in the voice of every person who had ever understood, all at once, that the world they thought they were living in was not quite the world they actually occupied. "You could have shown us this at any time," she said. "Yes," I said. "Why now? Why not before this vote, before the fleet was sent?" I reached forward and tapped the speaker panel again, which in council protocol indicated the conclusion of a formal address. The holographic display remained active. The lights in the dark continued to hold. "Because before the vote," I said, "it was possible to believe the council might correct itself without being shown the consequence of not doing so. After the vote, that possibility was gone." I looked around the chamber, at 47 species that had governed the known galaxy for longer than Earth had had written language. "We gave you 60 years to see us clearly. You chose not to. We cannot give you 60 more." No one spoke. The lights in the holographic display above us were steady and still, and enormous in their number, and every being in that chamber was looking at them with the particular expression of people who are reconsidering something they believe to be permanently settled. I sat in the Earth seat and waited. I was very good at waiting. The summit took place on board a human ship. That was not an accident, and every delegate who stepped through the docking bay of the EDS Ardent knew it. The venue had been proposed by Earth and accepted by the Council after 3 days of communication that I am choosing not to detail here, because those 3 days were largely composed of tense back and forth between Council administrators and Earth's diplomatic team, and were not interesting in the way that this story is otherwise interesting. What matters is that the summit happened, and it happened on our ship, and the 47 delegates who arrived at the Ardent's docking bay over the course of a standard morning did so in the full knowledge that they were entering a human vessel for the first time in the history of contact between our species. My name is Miracio. I was the commanding officer of the EDS Ardent for 11 years, and I had been selected to host the summit because the Ardent was the largest and most accommodating vessel in the Compact's fleet, with a conference suite capable of holding 60 delegates comfortably, and because Admiral Okafor trusted my crew to maintain the specific combination of professional warmth and quiet competence that he wanted the Council to experience from the moment they arrived. We had prepared for 6 weeks. I want to be clear about what that preparation involved, because it is easy to assume that hosting a diplomatic summit simply means setting chairs around a table and providing refreshments appropriate to 47 species' nutritional requirements. And while we did do both of those things, the preparation went considerably further. Every member of the Ardent's crew of 700 had been briefed extensively on the customs, sensitivities, and known preferences of each attending species. Every corridor the delegates would walk through had been reviewed for anything that might be read as threatening, provocative, or confusing. The environmental systems had been adjusted to maintain a temperature, humidity, and atmospheric composition comfortable for the broadest possible range of species without compromising the health of our own crew. We had also, deliberately and with great care, made no attempt to hide what the Ardent was. The delegates would walk through corridors designed for human beings. They would see equipment calibrated for human hands. They would observe a crew that moved with the efficiency of people who had spent years training in a military environment. Because they had. We were not performing strength. We were simply not hiding it. And there is a difference between those two things that matters enormously when you are trying to communicate with beings who have spent 60 years assuming you did not have any strength to speak of. The first delegates to arrive were from the Velkari mission, which surprised no one. The High Arbiter herself led the delegation, which surprised everyone, because senior council officials typically sent subordinates to preliminary summits and attended the formal sessions only. She walked through the docking bay with her characteristic stillness and looked at everything, and I mean everything, the way a person looks at a room they are encountering for the first time and intend to remember in full detail. I met her at the bay entrance and offered the standard Earth greeting, which is an open hand extended palm upward, which across most human cultures means something close to, "I am not holding a weapon, and I am not taking anything from you." She looked at my hand for a moment, then placed her own hand briefly above it without touching it, which I had studied enough to know was the Velkari equivalent of the same sentiment. We walked together toward the conference suite. She did not speak immediately. She was watching the crew. "Your people move efficiently," she said, after we had walked perhaps 30 meters. "They are well trained," I said. "How long have they served on this vessel?" "The senior crew. Between 4 and 9 years," I said. "Most of them have been with the Compact since before this ship was commissioned." She was quiet for a moment. "The Compact," she said. "That is what you call your military organization." "The Earth Defense Compact," I said. "Yes. Defense," she said. "You chose that word deliberately." "We always choose our words deliberately," I said. She made a sound that I did not have a clean translation for, but that functioned, contextually, as acknowledgement. She continued watching the crew as we walked. I had prepared for many things in the weeks before the summit. What I had not fully prepared for was the particular experience of watching beings who were accustomed to being the most powerful presence in any room they entered recalibrate themselves in real time. It was subtle. It was not fear. Not quite. It was the careful, intelligent adjustment of an organism that has just encountered information that requires it to update its model of the world, and is doing so deliberately and without panic, because that is the only sensible response. The Velkari High Arbiter was doing exactly that. She was updating. The delegates from the Drath Confederation arrived 90 minutes later, which was 30 minutes past their scheduled docking time, and I noted the delay without comment. The Drath were one of the 3 species that had voted for the annexation resolution, and had also been among the loudest advocates for a council military response to what they were calling Earth's unauthorized display of force, a phrase that I found interesting given that we had not actually used any force, only demonstrated its availability. They were a compact, fast-moving people, expressive in their body language in a way that made them easy to read if you knew the vocabulary, and the vocabulary of the Drath delegation as they came down the docking ramp was unmistakably uncomfortable. They were not afraid of the ship. They were afraid of what the ship represented, which is a more complex thing to be afraid of and, in my experience, tends to produce behavior that is more difficult to predict. The summit sessions began in the afternoon. I was not present for all of them. My role was the ship, and I stayed where the ship needed me. But I had feeds from the conference suite, and I watched them when my duties allowed, which was often enough to follow the shape of the conversation, even when I missed the details. Yara led the Earth delegation with the same quality she had demonstrated in the chamber, calm, specific, and completely unbothered by the emotional temperature of the room around her. She had brought 4 advisors, all of them people who had spent years in various capacities watching council species make decisions, and the 5 of them presented Earth's position with a precision that I suspected felt, to the council delegates, less like a negotiation and more like a teacher correcting an examination. The terms were not punitive. That surprised several delegates visibly, and I understood why. We had the leverage to demand almost anything, and we were not demanding almost anything. We were demanding 3 things. First, the rejection of Resolution 7 Theta in its entirety. Second, Earth's formal recognition as a Class 1 sovereign power, retroactive. Third, a standing procedural rule requiring any council resolution affecting a non-member species to include a formal hearing from a representative of that species before the vote was held. The third point was the one that produced the most reaction. The Velkari High Arbiter asked Yara directly why that rule mattered to us, given that we were now seeking member status, and would have full voting rights regardless. Yara's answer was one I had heard her give in a briefing 3 weeks earlier, and it still had the same quality when she gave it in the chamber. It was simple, it was clear, and it was impossible to argue with. Because we know what it feels like, she said, to have decisions made about you by people who chose not to hear your voice first. We do not want any other species to experience that unnecessarily. We kept records, over the past 60 years, of every non-member species affected by council votes without consultation. There are 93 of them. We would like to share those records with the council, as a gift, not as an accusation. The room was very quiet after that. On the second day, the incident with the Drath delegate occurred. His name was Ket Sovara, and he was the second-ranking member of the Drath delegation, a senior official with a reputation for aggressive negotiation. On the morning of the second session, my executive officer, a calm and methodical person named Owen Lark, came to my office and told me that Ket Sovara had approached him in the corridor outside the senior crew quarters the previous evening and offered him a data crystal. The crystal, Sovara had said, contained financial transfer codes, access to a private account in a non-council banking system, carrying enough value to represent approximately 3 years of Owen's salary. In exchange, Sovara had asked for a 60-second window of unsupervised access to the Arden's communication array. Owen had accepted the crystal, thanked Sovara politely, and spent the subsequent 2 hours writing a detailed incident report, which he placed on my desk at first light. I read the report. I read it again. I put it in a secure file and marked it for transmission to Yara. I did not arrest Sovara. I did not confront him. I did not mention the incident to any other member of the Drath delegation. What I did was tell Owen, quietly, to return the crystal to Sovara with a brief personal note. The Arden's systems were not accessible to outside requests, and Commander Lark appreciated the gesture but had no need of it. The note was entirely polite. It said nothing about a report. It said nothing about what we knew, or what we had filed, or what we might choose to do with the information at a time of our selection. I watched Ket Sovara in the summit feeds for the rest of the conference. He was not the same after he received Owen's note. He participated in sessions with less force than before. He did not initiate any further conversations with crew members. He sat slightly removed from his delegation, in a way that suggested he was doing a great deal of private thinking, most of it focused, I suspected, on the question of what we had decided to do with what we knew, and when. The answer was that we had decided to do nothing with it yet, and the when was indefinite. That uncertainty, I felt, was more useful to us than any formal action would have been. The final vote on Earth's terms came on the afternoon of the third day. I was on the bridge. I watched the conference feed on a secondary display while managing the routine operations of a ship at anchor in open space. The vote was simple. Each delegation confirmed its position through the chamber's automated system, and the results compiled in real time on the conference display. 44 in favor. 3 opposed. The 3 opposed were the Drath Confederation, the Velkari Provisional Faction, and a small species called the Merrick Remnant, whose name I recognized from Earth's records as one of the original architects of the Class 3 classification system 60 years earlier. 44-3. I sat on the bridge and looked at those numbers, and felt something that I suspect every member of our compact felt when the result came through. Something warm and very deep, and not entirely translatable into language. Not triumph, not relief, exactly, though there was relief in it. It was more like the feeling of putting something down that you have been carrying for a very long time, and only fully understanding its weight in the moment your arms are finally free of it. Captain. My comms officer, a young man named Felix Grant, turned from his station. Message from Admiral Okafor. I looked up. Read it. Felix read it aloud. It was 4 words. Well done, Captain CO. I looked back at my display. 44-3. Outside the observation ports, space was dark and quiet, and enormous in all directions. In the asteroid belt far behind us, 1,147 ships sat in their hidden berths, with their engines at idle, their weapons offline, their running lights off, invisible again to the galaxy at large. The annexation fleet's 40 vessels had been released from containment 18 hours earlier, and had returned to Council space under their own power. undamaged, their crews unharmed, carrying with them the particular kind of memory that does not fade quickly. We had built a fleet for 60 years and never used it. We had sent one diplomat into a room she was not permitted to enter. We had let the galaxy look at what we had, and then we had made only 3 requests, all of them reasonable, one of them directly designed to protect species other than ourselves. The 3 who voted against us had looked at those facts and still voted no. I thought about that and found that I was not particularly troubled by it. 3 no votes from species that had built their political identity on the assumption of others' weakness was not opposition. It was the sound of a worldview losing its grip on reality, slowly and loudly, the way things do when the facts finally contradict them beyond the point of comfortable denial. I picked up the coffee that Felix had set beside my station an hour earlier. It was cold. I drank it anyway. A year passes differently when you are not waiting anymore. I have been trying to articulate that distinction for some time, and I am not sure I have found the right words for it yet. But I will try, because the difference matters. For 4 years and 7 months, every morning I spent on the council station had the quality of a held breath. I woke up, I put on my gray observer badge, and I went to watch decisions being made in a room I could not enter, by species who were not thinking about me, and I kept records and sent signals home and waited. The waiting was not passive, as I said, but it was always waiting, in the sense that everything I did was in service of a moment that had not arrived yet. The moment arrived on a Tuesday, and then there were 3 days on a ship, and a vote, and numbers on a display, and then, quite abruptly, the waiting was over. My name is Yara Holt, and this is what the year after looks like. The Earth consulate on the council station is not a small room with no windows. It is a suite of 7 interconnected chambers on the station's central ring, with a view of open space through a full-length observation port that runs the length of the main office. We designed it ourselves. We furnished it ourselves. The station's administrative body processed our application for the space in 4 days, which I found notable given that standard applications from new member species typically took several months, though I did not say so publicly. On the first morning in the new office, before the furniture was fully arranged, and while several of my staff were still unpacking equipment, I stood at the observation port for a long time and looked at the stars. I was thinking about the Cirith. The Cirith are, or were, a species whose recorded history in the Council archives goes back over 200 years. Approximately 180 years ago, the Marek hegemony, then a much more powerful entity than it is now, absorbed the Cirith's home system through a combination of economic pressure and military threat, reclassified the Cirith as a dependent population under Marek administration, and systematically reduced their political, cultural, and territorial rights over the following decades, until there was very little of what had once been an independent civilization remaining. The Council had voted on the Cirith situation 4 times over the following century and a half. Each vote had either reaffirmed the Marek hegemony's administration, or introduced measures so mild and poorly enforced as to be functionally meaningless. Earth's observers had documented every one of those votes. We had the records, we had the testimony, we had, in the files Yara had transmitted home over 4 years and 7 months, a detailed picture of what the Cirith had been before the Marek hegemony and what they had been reduced to afterward. In the 2nd month after the summit, Earth brought a formal petition to the Council floor, requesting protected status for the Cirith people. We did not request it loudly. We did not make speeches or call for accountability, or use any of the language that would have positioned the petition as a confrontation. We simply presented the documentation, stated that the standard of treatment the Cirith had received was inconsistent with the Council's own founding principles regarding the rights of sentient species, and asked the Council to correct a 200-year-old oversight. The vote passed. Not unanimously. The Marek remnant predictably opposed it, and 2 species with economic ties to Marek administration abstained. But it passed, and the Cirith were given protected status, and a formal commission was established to review the terms of their situation, with the goal of eventually restoring some measure of autonomous governance. When word of the vote reached the Cirith colony that served as their de facto capital, there was a celebration that our diplomatic monitoring team described as remarkable in its quiet dignity. They did not celebrate loudly. They were not accustomed to being given things worth celebrating. They gathered in public spaces and stood together, and they were still, in a way that I recognized without being able to explain it, because I had spent years practicing a version of that stillness myself. I sent a personal message to the Sirith liaison assigned to the commission. I told her that Earth had been watching for a long time, and we were glad we had. She sent back a message that was 2 sentences long. The first sentence said thank you. The second sentence said she hoped we would continue watching. We would. In the months that followed, the Council's procedural landscape changed in ways both large and small that I had not fully anticipated, even having spent 4 years observing it closely. The new standing rule requiring non-member species to be heard before votes affecting them were taken had an effect on council sessions that I would describe as a kind of slowing down, not in any negative sense, but in the way that a person walking quickly through a familiar corridor slows down when they notice there are more people in the corridor than usual, and begins to pay attention in a way they previously had not bothered to. Sessions ran longer. Hearings took time. The voices of species that had previously been invisible in council deliberations were now formally audible, and what they said, in session after session, was that they had been waiting a long time to speak, and they had things to say. I sat in the Earth seat on the chamber floor and listened to all of it. Every session, every testimony, every voice that had previously existed only in our records and was now speaking in real time in a chamber that was obligated to hear it. There is a particular kind of satisfaction in watching a change you advocated for produce results beyond what you imagined. I have looked for words to describe it, and the closest I can find is this. It is like having spent a long time building something in the dark, and then the lights come on, and the thing you built is both exactly what you planned and also more than you expected, because the dark had hidden certain dimensions from you while you were working. On a warm afternoon in the station's 4th month of the new session cycle, I found myself alone in the corridor outside the main chamber after a lengthy hearing, stretching my back and drinking water and thinking about nothing in particular, when I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find the Velkari High Arbiter walking in my direction. She was alone, which was unusual. She slowed when she saw me and stopped at a comfortable distance. "Ambassador Holt," she said. "High Arbiter," I said. There was a pause of the kind that exists when 2 people are calculating whether to say the thing they have been thinking about saying. I waited. She was better at waiting than most beings I had met, but I had been practicing considerably longer. "I want to ask you something," she said finally. "A personal question. You may decline to answer." "Please ask it," I said. "Why did you wait so long?" she said. "Not Earth. I understand Earth's reasons, at least in part. I mean you, personally. You were there for 4 years. You sat in that gallery. You watched us pass resolutions that affected dozens of species without their input. Watched us treat your world as a category rather than a civilization. Watched us build toward exactly the mistake we eventually made." She paused. "Why did you not speak sooner?" It was a genuine question. She was not asking rhetorically. She was asking the way a person asks when they need to understand something for reasons that matter to them privately. I thought about my answer for a moment, because speaking at the wrong moment would have been indistinguishable from not speaking at all. I said, "If I had stood up in that gallery in my first year and said, 'Earth is not what you think it is,' you would have heard me, and dismissed me, and adjusted your security protocols, and I would have accomplished nothing except the loss of my access to the building." I looked at her. The moment I stood up had to be a moment when what I said could not be dismissed. That required the right circumstances. Creating the right circumstances required time. "You calculated the entire sequence," she said. "We calculated most of it," I said. "The annexation vote was the event we had prepared for. We did not know it would be an annexation vote specifically. We prepared for the category, a decision that would make the status quo untenable and give us justification for revealing ourselves. When that category was filled, we acted." She was quiet for a moment. "You had records of us," she said. 60 years of records." "Yes. Of everything. Of everything we could observe from the positions we held," I said, "which was considerable. Including the Velkari's conduct in this chamber." "Including that," I said. She absorbed this with the particular stillness that was her characteristic response to information she was processing at depth. Then she said something that I did not expect. "I am glad," she said, "that what you found was sufficient to work with, rather than merely to condemn." I looked at her for a moment. "We did not come here to condemn anyone," I said. "We came here to participate. Those are different things." "Yes," she said, "I am beginning to understand that." She inclined her head in what I had learned was the Valkyrie gesture of considered acknowledgement between equals, which was different from deference, and different from courtesy, and was in fact the closest thing in their cultural vocabulary to a form of respect that had been earned rather than assumed. "Good afternoon, Ambassador." "Good afternoon, High Arbiter," I said. She walked away down the corridor. I watched her go. Then I turned back toward the observation port at the end of the hall, which looked out on the same stars I had been watching for 4 years and 7 months from a room with no windows, and I thought about what she had said. Sufficient to work with rather than merely to condemn. That was it, precisely. That was the thing we had decided, 60 years ago in a room in London, that we needed to understand before we could act. Not whether the galaxy was dangerous. It clearly was. Not whether the council was flawed. It transparently was. The question was whether it was workable, whether the beings inside it, given the right conditions and the right pressure applied in the right places, were capable of something better than what they had been doing. The answer, it turned out, was yes. Imperfect and slow and resistant and occasionally still frustrating, but yes. I had been in the new office for 4 months when the message came from Renz. It arrived in the early evening, through the secure compact channel that I checked out of habit, even though the cadence of crisis had settled significantly. The message was short. Fleet stood down, waiting, as usual. I read it 3 times. Then I laughed. I had not laughed in a long time, and it surprised me slightly, the way genuine laughter always does when you have forgotten it was a thing you were capable of. I laughed for a moment by myself in the main office with the stars visible through the observation port, and my staff working in the rooms around me, and no one came to see what had happened, which was fine, because some things are small enough to belong only to the moment they occur in. The fleet had returned to its berths. 1,147 ships, invisible again in the asteroid belt, engines at idle, running lights off. They were waiting, the way they had always waited, the way we had all always waited, not passively, not with any surrender of readiness, just with the particular quality of attention that distinguishes something that has found the right moment from something that is still looking for it. I sent back a reply. 2 words, because we had a history with 2-word messages and I was not going to break a useful tradition. Still watching. The new species made contact with the Council 3 weeks later. They arrived at the station in a single ship, which was not a warship, and sent a greeting formatted in the standard mathematical structure that the Council's first contact protocol specified. Their world was called, in their language, something that the translation system rendered approximately as the place where we began. Their technology was roughly equivalent to Earth's at the time of our first contact, 60 years ago. They were cautious and precise in their communication, and they described themselves, in that first message, as a young species hoping to learn about the wider galaxy without making enemies. I read the transcript of their initial transmission from my office. I read it twice. Then I asked my assistant to put the transcript in a file labeled First New Contact, and set it in a folder that already contained, at that point, documentation of 93 other species that the Council had encountered and affected over 60 years without giving any of them the consideration they deserved. Except that this time was different. I watched the session in which the Council received the new species representatives for the first time. I watched from my seat on the chamber floor, as a full member, with a glass of water on the desk in front of me, and a tablet for notes, and the ability to request floor time whenever I chose. The new species delegation was small, 3 representatives, wearing simple clothes, sitting in the visitors' gallery with the particular stillness of beings who are in an unfamiliar environment and are trying very hard to be respectful, while also being very unsure of what is happening. I recognized that stillness. I had practiced a version of it for 4 years. I knew what it felt like from the inside. The first item on the session agenda, for the first time in the Council's recorded history, was a formal welcome address to the visiting delegation. Not a classification assessment, not a capability review. A welcome. The second item was a formal invitation to speak, in any language they chose, about their civilization, their concerns, and what they were hoping the council might be able to offer them. The third item, which had been placed on the agenda by the Earth delegation, was a resolution confirming that no vote affecting the new species' home system or people would be held without a formal hearing from their representatives first. It passed before they had finished speaking. I sat in the Earth seat and watched the 3 visitors in the gallery receive the translation of what had just happened in the chamber below them. I watched the change in their stillness, the slight relaxation of posture that happens when a held breath is finally released. I did not stand up. I did not speak. I did not draw attention to the fact that I was watching. I had spent 60 years learning how to be unobtrusive, and the habit did not vanish simply because the reason for it had. Some tools are worth keeping even after the specific task that required them is complete. Because the world is large, and the future is long, and you cannot always know, in advance, when a skill you have cultivated will turn out to be exactly what the next moment needs. I picked up my water glass. I looked at the 3 visitors in the gallery, with their careful posture and their uncertain eyes, and I thought, you are not alone, even though you think you are. You are not invisible, even though no one has told you that yet. Someone in this room has been watching, and remembering, and keeping records, and the records are not being kept against you. They are being kept for you. I set the water glass down. I opened my tablet and made a note. Then I looked up at the gallery, and at the chamber floor, and at the stars visible through the high windows of the council station, patient and enormous in all directions. Earth remained quiet for 60 years. We were not quiet anymore. But we had not forgotten what the quiet taught us, that watching carefully is its own kind of power, that patience is its own kind of preparation, and that the moment you choose to speak matters as much as anything you say when you finally open your mouth. We had chosen our moment. Now we were going to make sure we used it well.